Welcome to Tranquility Magazine Podcast with your host, Jasmine Maya Royce.
Gyan Yankovichhas spent the last 12 years writing content to help women better their relationships with themselves, the world, and people around them. She has worked as a senior lifestyle editor at BuzzFeed and a managing editor at Man Repeller, and has written for The Cut, Vox, Vice, and many more. Currently, she's a lifestyle editor of two of Australia's leading newspapers, the Australian Morning Herald, The Age, and she has moved back to her home in Sydney. Now, her new book, Friendship First, From New Sparks to Chosen Family, How Our Friends Pave the Way to Lifelong Happiness. Welcome to the show, Pam.
Thank you so much for having me.
So my first question is always, what is your current mantra or state of mind?
It's so funny you ask me this at the moment because I'm not a huge mantra person, but I actually have been saying for the last few weeks that my current mantra is just let it wash over you, because I just got back from 3 weeks vacation and came back into a kind of stressful work situation, and I've got stuff happening with the book, which is all exciting, but also very full on sometimes, again, working alongside full-time work. And I've kind of just stuck with this, like when, someone is irritating me or I feel like things piling up, I'm like, just try and let it wash over you and just see if that's a kind of coping strategy before you take too much action or get too fixated on something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder for making yourself stable in a situation, especially because you've been a journalist and you're working for a newspaper. We'll talk about high energy environment and how it kind of reflects on your mental state and how affected you are at certain situation. It's a good idea to have more awareness for. Can you explain the reason why you focused as journalism as your, upbringing or your calling for being a writer?
I mean, I always loved writing as a kid. I mean, that's not that unusual, but always loved storytelling. And I think that the idea of trying to become a career novelist seemed a little bit too stressful when I was looking at my prospects ahead of me, even in high school. And journalism just seemed like such a great fit. I worked in magazines for the first 5 years of my career, which was so fun and so creative, and some of the best years of my working life so far, and then have slowly found myself in kind of more, quote unquote, serious journalism, which has been really, really interesting. And I think that the lifestyle space is so fun, but also so important in helping people, improve their lives and their relationships with themselves as well.
Yeah. So pairing off of that, the idea that what was the calling that made you look at how to educate women about bettering themselves and figuring out the process of your calling for that as a niche, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, I always say to the people that I manage or mentor or work with, like, never write a story that you wouldn't read. And when I think about the kind of content that I was drawn to, it is always, normally about women. It's about how we feel, how we relate to each other, our friendships, how we, connect to one another. So I think that that's why I like writing about that so much, because if you're writing about something that you're thinking about anyway, or would be talking about regardless of whether you did it for work or not, I think that it's the best way to feel happy with what you're doing as well. But it's also the best way to find that spark in your work.
I think that's really enlightened focus and also much needed. I believe that women need to, specifically because I'm a woman, mentor and collaborate with women better. Then we're not in competition with each other, so we can build each other up again and support each other. Men do it better that they have a tribe, that they all go through and they have a unit they focus on and they encourage each other. But women, when I came into the scene, I guess some time ago, I was the only woman on staff or the one that's there. And I'm like the lone wolf concept that I'm not really truly in the tribe or not. And then the other ladies come by and I truly want to work and connect with them because I'm inspired, I'm educated, and women are far faster sometimes. And that's why we have this really great experience that kind of reconnecting and re-envisioning our collaboration with women is very important, especially now. And then elaborating that you extended on in your book as well. I want to give you a applaud that you have references all on your book. So true journalism research, which I always appreciate. And I like the fact that your fact points are always designated to a certain book or relative quote that kind of does the research value to make it authentic and true. So I am an ambivert, and you quoted yourself as being an extrovert. So in your book, you're kind of talking about the relationship or how to seek out friendships. And this is at the time point that you were living in New York and you're trying to work on developing your awareness about how to gather friends. If you're dealing with an introverted person, what would be some takeaways that you could think about to help an introverted person in maybe a realm like New York or Sydney, which is also a really big city?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as I say in the book, and as you said just there, I do consider myself an extrovert. My partner, on the other hand, is definitely an introvert. And I think that it's part of respecting what you know about that person. It's respecting that just because someone's an introvert doesn't mean that they don't want to be invited to the party or go to the party or hang out at the party. It just means that they might not want to do stuff back to back, and that sometimes they're going to pop in and then have to go home to recharge, and that's totally fine. I think that there's a kind of flexibility that as an extrovert, you kind of have to work around people who are introverted. But also as an introvert, it's something that you have to just make peace with yourself and know yourself and know that you shouldn't push yourself, because I know that for friends of mine who are introverts, it's when they push themselves to do things that they know they're not going to be comfortable with, or they know they're not going to have a good time at, that they don't. They know themselves, but they kind of fall into that pressure of, I should go. And of course, I think with especially when you're trying to meet new people, sometimes you do have to push out of that comfort zone and be like, no, go to the party. You never know who you'll run into. But there has to be limitations with that. And I think it's working within your comfort zone or just pushing a little bit outside it instead of going all the way outside to meet someone else's expectations who might not necessarily understand how a certain event feels to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very much an important factor that I thought for a long time that I was an extrovert. And then you just run out of steam. I was like, I need a break back, and that's healthy boundaries for myself. But I also understand that I have so many friends, and also you have a good balance, an introverted, extroverted relationship. This is balancing each other, that you will force them to go out and do things. Whereas when they're alone and don't, I realized after the pandemic, a lot of my creative friends that are introverted styles have a very different pull on wanting to go out and socialize. They become wallflowers, a very past dated, antiquated term, but still want someone to connect it because they just want to be around the people and not really make the reach out. But it's still a factor that they feel more alone than ever, especially after the pandemic, which you touch upon your experience with the pandemic and how your story was kind of created from this. And I like that idea about your New York lifestyle. And you want to explain a little bit about the pandemic and what were the takeaways from you at that point when you felt like social engagement was not an option?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that the pandemic was a huge turning point for many of us with our friendships. And what was interesting to me is that we were kind of living these lives that were so stripped back. I was really lucky in that I still had my health. I was living with my partner, so he was still very much in my life, probably arguably too much in my life in the one bedroom apartment that we were sharing. I was still working, which I was really lucky to be doing. But, so I had these really core things that were still there in that work relationship, safety and health. And I felt so empty. And I think that so much of that was because the friends were missing. And it was this really unique moment in life where you could see, still working, still seeing partner, still trucking along, cooking, feeling okay. But without friends and without socializing, even your more casual friends, the ones that you run into once a month at a party, not even necessarily your best friends or work friends in the office, seeing life stripped away, stripped without all of those things was really bleak. And I know that that's how so many people felt. And I think that it was a big wake up call for a lot of us.
Yeah, I think it's very much topical concept and the takeaways from the pandemic. And also when we have AI coming on the scene, the idea of being human and what is an entirely empathic human feeling or collaboration that we alone possess as being a human, and how to reconnect, because they've done studies that you have quoted multitudes of it as aging people get older and you have less people involved in your life. But also when you're a baby and a child, you need that interconnection because it's part of your mental health. And not having that was, I think, very hard for people going on an inner journey, but also depression would peak out and a lot of people drinking, which was not really the meat of the subject because we're in isolation and that avoiding factor. We realize how important, and through your book is a conduit to kind of portray the value of friendships and how they are. I like the version that you talk about in your book. I kind of call it the wave theory. It sounds like physics, that a little bit of an effort to reach out, to wave to someone, to make a new acquaintance is very important. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So that idea in the book is really hooked off this study that was done in Australia where I live that was looking at refugees who had come to move to Australia and how comfortable they felt in the new neighborhoods that they were moving into. And a lot of the time for a lot of these people, there was a real language barrier with the people who lived around them, but they really reported feeling much more comfortable, much more happy, much more at home when they'd had interactions with neighbors that were often just a hello or a smile. And to me, that was just so powerful because when you see someone in your street and you think, oh, should I wave? Should I not? Should I smile? Should I not? Should I say hi? Right? Should I not? We really underestimate the influence that can have on someone feeling at home and feeling part of a community, which, is obviously so important for people like refugees or immigrants, but for the rest of us as well.
Yeah. I think it's also because I've been like you in another country by myself, didn't know anyone. So I resonate that you don't really feel immersed or accepted sometimes. We're in bigger cities. For me, it was London. For you, it was New York. So a different experience that you're always kind of on the outside looking in, and creating a community environment. I think it's so important for, especially now, like homeless environments. The thing I would say, being seen, being acknowledged is a first step to feeling included. And it doesn't have to be anyone. It could be anyone else that you pass by, or just doing a acknowledgement that they're there is a very healthy way of seeing people as on this world together, that we're all involved. So in a section, what's holding us back, you kind of elaborate on concepts of us stopping each other from reaching out. You want to explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting pieces of research that I came across in the book was this concept called the liking gap. And the idea behind this theory is that we really underestimate how much people enjoy interactions with us. So say we're at a party or a dinner or, a work event, and we meet someone new and we get chatting to them, and then the conversation ends, we go our separate ways. Research shows that both people in that interaction generally underestimate how much the other person enjoyed it. And for that reason, it makes us a little bit more hesitant to go back to them and have another conversation or spark up a conversation with something new. Whereas, and it does happen when you have a conversation with someone and you walk away thinking, that was really good. And they thought that I was quite funny and we really clicked. And, you can kind of feel yourself be really energized by that and spend the rest of the night in a different mood. But when that doesn't happen, which is most of the time, according to this research, we end up, retreating. We might be a little bit more quiet for the rest of the night. We're more likely to wake up the next day and think, oh, why did I say that thing to that person last night? Oh, I hope I don't run into them again. I shouldn't make so many jokes when I'm at parties, all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's a really big barrier when it comes to meeting new people and connecting and staying in touch with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very relevant that most people, I realize, that will focus on what their errors are rather than the concern of, most people are thinking about themselves more than they actually are thinking about you. Their own nervous anxiety, insecurities will pop up, and you feel like you shared so much that you shouldn't have shared. You shared things that you didn't want to share. You mispronunciation or accidents or anything like that. And it ends up being the reflection that you take back, but also the positive narrative that you're talking about there is that moment when you feel energized by talking to someone. You're like, I feel like we connected, but we didn't say much. But I think that's a calling for me to kind of approach the relationship. And you want to expand about the idea about approaching a relationship as a friendship in a way that making the effort that means something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was more research that I came across that was, another thing we underestimate is how much people like hearing from us, whether they're a former colleague or an old friend. Sometimes I think, oh, it's been too long. I'm not going to send them a text. It might be a bit weird. They might not want to hear from me. They might not write back. Like they're probably busy. But most people do want to hear from us. And I think that that's really evident when we think about the last time that we heard from an old friend that we'd kind of fallen in touch with, or even someone that we haven't spoken to for a few months. And the feeling is rarely like, I wish they didn't text me. It's normally really excited and happy that they reached out. And I think that once we have all these things kind of collated in our minds, and there's a real comfort in knowing that it's not just us that feels this way. It's not just us that walks away from some interactions thinking, oh, did I mess that up? I don't think they liked me that much, or feels nervous about reaching out to someone. Once you know that everyone kind of feels that way, to me at least, it feels a little bit easier to overcome that hurdle and think, no, I know everyone feels this way and I'm going to try and overcome it because there's so many net positives here if I do.
Yeah, I think you touch on a quote, when you really want something, you have to work for it. A great quote in understanding harboring friendships and wanting to share to develop the concept of friendships. And some of that harboring truth, the implemented boundaries and tiny considerations while inside a friendship, there are unspoken truths and demise of friendships because of alternatives that we can't grow out of a friendship or a deeper developed friendship and the long term. What are some of the ideas that you researched or discovered yourself about implementing conversations about healthy boundaries and interactions with friendships to consistently improve and elevate them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that it's a huge source of tension in friendships, which is boundaries. And I think that a lot of that comes out of the fact that we often don't communicate about conflict with our friends as much as we do a romantic partner. I came across research that really highlighted that as well. We're much more likely to take a passive approach to friendships than romantic relationships. So rather than say with a romantic partner, we're more likely to be like, okay, let's sit down and talk it out until we find a resolution, or more likely to just get in a huge fight about it and potentially break up. With friendships, we either ignore it and just move past it and never really gets addressed and it's more likely to happen again, or we just kind of stop talking to our friend and we ghost them and we drift away and nothing really gets healed. So I think that boundaries comes into that because it's part of those conversations that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And it's really about expectations. Oftentimes a boundary comes back to an expectation that isn't being met. Or it's being met in a way that isn't really reasonable. So I think that, yeah, it's just a practice of talking to our friends in a way that you would talk to a romantic partner, where most of us are so much more comfortable saying either that wasn't a boundary to me, or like you've overstepped a boundary to me, or I expect you to act this way in this certain situation. You didn't, and it's upset me, and in the future I would really like you to.
True. I think in the idea of expectations is a dangerous word, and it doesn't matter what the friendship is or a relationship, having unrequested or unexpected ways that you view a friendship and you expect from your friendships is a witnessing a demise of something because they're unaware of, and we've seen it in relationships, it's easier to have those fights and those moments that you're like, oh, how could you, and how would this, and I have a boundary for this thing. But when it comes to friendships, like evolving them in a way that you have to be more informative and not like dictator types, but also understanding that they could be all unaware of what you're talking about, that they didn't even realize what they did. But it's a hard one for a lot of people, I think, to delve into evolutions of friendships that are new, recent, or anything like that, to kind of have those conversations that, I don't appreciate that tone of voice or their styling, or I think you're blaming me for something I didn't do or anything like that, because a friendship is a relationship, no matter what you say about it. But inside of an actual, I'd say, coupling, pairing, partnering, whatever it is, what are some uplifting research that you have devised to stay in contact with your friendships rather than full focus into your relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. One thing that I am really obsessed with and what I've loved talking to people about in many of my various interviews about friendships over the years is the idea of setting up traditions and milestones in friendships. I think that it's a really beautiful way to stay in touch with people, whether it's, once a month we go to a movie, or whether it's once a year we go to dinner at this place, and we, because it's been a year since we ran into each other at that dinner party and got in touch again. These again are things that we have with romantic partners and are what kind of signposts the evolution of our relationships. And there's so much opportunity to have those things with friends. In terms of just staying in touch, I think that that's where it comes back to expectations. I've spoken to so many people who were really happy to tell me about these friends that they've had for decades and decades and decades. And they're like, it's fine if we don't talk for 6 months or a year. As soon as we get back together, it feels like nothing has changed. And I love hearing those stories because it's clear that they have a shared expectation of how much the other person needs to reach out. When those relationships don't work is when there's a mismatched expectation and one person thinks that's fine to not catch up for 6 months or a year and expect that everything's the same when you do. But if the other person is like, well, no, well, actually, I send you a text or try to call you every 2 weeks and you don't answer or you don't reply, and that makes me feel really bad and I don't want to pretend that everything's fine. So I think that when we talk about communication and staying in touch with friends, it's not necessarily one hard and fast rule of how much we should be doing it. It's just about making sure that you're both on the same page of how much you want to stay in touch, because it can be as little or as much as you want. But if both people are feeling uncomfortable with that, then it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. In a way that, it is, you pair it back to look at a friendship as a relationship in its own way, and every connection you make or interact with is a development of a relationship inside of the term of friendship. But it's also that kind of touch base. And some people are gifted with that idea and reach out more often, and some people don't at all. So realizing that, you would say extroverted, introverted. I don't reach out because I'm introverted, but I still want to people to reach out to me, but I don't know how to do that or request it or how to identify it, because that's what they require, but they can't share what they are requiring because people are unaware. But in that, like, friendship are an evolution. I always go back to the quote about the idea of some friendships are like leaves, they blow in the wind. Some are like branches that last through 3 or 4 seasons, and some are your roots, your foundation. And I'm lucky that when I have a conversation with a lot of people, they haven't had the long-term friendships I have. And so the friendship term is a very interesting, because you're a person that loves words in a way that you use them for your benefit, but words have a back catalog of their inner work that they resonate to understand. And you use this term for about big friends, and you explored about it referencing a book called Big Friend, How We Keep Each Other Close, from Sal and Fredman. And the best story that kind of meets that idea of a big friend for you and how you met. Do you have any one of those that you can share for today?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I write about him in the book, but one of my best friends, Tim, and I met when we were kids. He was the only boy invited to my 6th birthday party. So we've been friends for a long time. I changed schools when we were young, but we kind of reunited again in high school, and he's still one of my closest friends. And it's really interesting looking back on this friendship, which I did a lot when I was writing the book, and realizing that when we are talking about those friends, like those big friendships, those friendships who are our roots, how much of ourselves we have shown to them, but also how much we've seen each other change. I think that change is a really big point of conflict in friendships. It definitely can be, the whole even idea of like, you've changed is always, most of the time seen as a negative thing. It's, something that we were this way and I thought you were this way and now you're not, and I'm upset about it. This isn't really what I signed up for. But when I think about Tim and I, like, we've both changed so much in our friendship. It's been 25 years or something that we've known each other, but we've kind of embraced those changes. And of course, there have been changes that have made us feel less close, others that have made us feel much close, both geographically, but also, emotionally. But we've worked through that. And I think that that's kind of the key factor to a lot of these really long lasting big friendships is accepting that things are definitely going to change, and you're going to have to make an active decision during each of these times of change to stick with it and adapt and know that the friendship might look a little bit different. But if you want to hold on to this person who has all this history and all this care and all this loyalty to you, you're going to have to just, embrace it.
Wise words. And a great story, by the way, about your friend and you in the book, and the idea of the exploration of evolution together, because you don't want to not evolve, because change scares so many people about the idea of change. Like, how could you? What is this? I'm terrified. Like, no matter what age you are, the idea of change is an entire minutia of a concept, is so broad for so many that I live for change. But in that, like, friendship gets to a certain point, and you move away and you move closer in the region, and the idea that you paired on a story with a lady that grew up with people around the block and they now move in different areas, but it's still kind of that reach out factor that someone or the other one has to do to kind of covet and harbor that friendship to evolve together. And doesn't matter where you are, but good strong friendships will kind of step back to look at them as a mirror, because we are all mirrors for each other to reflect what we need to work on and how we need to understand. And you were truly compassionate at his journey at certain points where I registered, because my uncle was that. And it was hard for him to come out and speak about what he was dealing with, but he was in an evolved state that you touch upon in the 1970s. So things have changed rapidly, that being open in concepts that family hasn't resonated, and evolving with the growth of a family. And you touch on points about connected as friendship as a group. You want to expand upon that?
Yeah. So one of the really interesting things that I came across in the book was kind of this concept of identity and all the different kinds of identities we have. And some obviously really tie us to our biological family, whether that's our ethnicity or, the fact that we have blue eyes, or we all speak the same language, or we're all part of the same religion. But a lot of our other identities are very separate to our family. And that could be, something like sexuality, or it could be an interest, or it could be something like deafness or another life experience that people who are biologically related to may not necessarily have. And those kind of identities are one of the reasons why friends are so important, and why community is so important, and why it's so important, I think, to really place a high value on friendships, especially those with the shared identity that no one when you're a child necessarily, or still, living and existing primarily within your family household have. And I think that for any of us who have an identity that's separate to our family, whether that's like being vegan or being really into a sports team or something like that, finding people who understand that identity and share it with you is so beautiful, and such a huge, huge, huge way to find joy. I think that it's so important. And those things, those people that we connect to mostly are our friends.
Yeah, you touch on certain subjects about finding and meeting people through different experiences, and the financial benefits and non-benefits quoted, but you made an example of friends and like Central Perk Cafe or something like that you find these people. And even in groups, the ballroom, the gay community, having events and things like that to gather people. And at this point, I don't know what is a common outlet for people to find other like-minded, especially for neurodivergent people, which is autism, dyslexia, ADHD, ADD, and multitude, as well as, the gay community, which I would say LGBTQ plus, and having that moment to reach out to certain people to evolve their awareness and kind of connect. So you touch upon that a lot in your book with the ballroom aspect of having a group as a whole family, and having that community that will, take care of you when you need them the most.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting. I think looking back historically, and also looking at things how they are today, one of the things that I write about in the book is the concept of third places, and that is, the idea that we really need places, and there's a lot of value in places that aren't either our workplace or our home. And, the kind of ideal third place is somewhere that is free. So it's not necessarily the cafe where you have to go spend money, though, a lot of people are happy to, if they can, go get a coffee with a friend. But places like parks, libraries, community centers, churches, where people can go for free and meet people and spend time where they get to be themselves. They're not necessarily with their family. They're not, being employed to do a role around their co-workers. They can be themselves and they can socialize and go and meet people and spend time. I also think that, in today's world, a lot of people find those places online. And speaking to people through interviews in the book, I'm so thankful for the online communities that people have been able to create. I think, as you say, like people that have certain identities that mean that it's harder for them to meet people in person. Maybe they're isolated, maybe they have, a reason why they would rather communicate with people from inside the safety of their home. But these online spaces and social media as well have just been so beautiful for different friendships. In the book, I interviewed 2 trans women, one who lives in Melbourne, one who lives in New York City, and they are both amazing music journalists and have never met in person, but they forged this really beautiful friendship over Twitter and now just over various messaging platforms. And, I interviewed them both separately about their friendship, and it was so evident how well they know each other and how much value they place on their relationship. And that's all outside meeting in person.
I mean, I think when the pandemic was hitting, a lot of people got into something that I already do, pen pals, because I have friends around the world. But it is a concept that the internet will, give you an opportunity to meet people no matter where they live, because you have like-minded and like experiences. Now the internet has provided a plethora of options that you don't have to be alone. And, things like Zoom and Skype and online WhatsApp concepts are making that bridge, that gap, very easy for people to find people that resonate with their mission and their state of mind. But it is a tricky thing to find the right balance for, you have to spend quality time abroad and just have a cup of tea or a coffee with them when they're, at a different timeline. Because I have friends in Australia where you're based, and we always have to plan strategically what time is available because it's a different timeline. But I still harbor those connections no matter where they are, because it's important to make sure you touch base with the people that are important in their life and their journey. So I have to close out. I have always 2 questions that I have to ask you and that I enjoy the most. What is the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, the best advice I have ever received. I think, this is a quote. You'll have to fact check me who it's from, but my favorite quote, which someone gave to me as advice at work once, is that it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. I think that my greatest goal in life is to, for people to think that I'm a kind person and a generous friend. And that to me is so much more important than any kind of career success. And in many ways, it's a lot easier to do. It's not difficult to be kind and to be thoughtful and to be empathetic. It's not necessarily always easy, but it's a much more manageable goal than sell as many books, become this, get this job title, earn this much money. And it's a much more pleasant thing to focus on.
It's a good understanding. I think I parallel with Keith Laus too. It says kindness is not weakness, because having to be kind and understand how to be kind, but also be on your own team, that you can navigate it wisely, that you're not too kind, that you're taken advantage of, is an important moment, but also very wise words. And the best lesson that you've ever learned from something that I don't really love the word failure, but the hardest one, for the experience that you've taken away and you walked away learning something valuable for you.
I think it would be that, people always tell you, I think when you have a failure, you've tried something, didn't work out, you went for a job, you didn't get it, that it's going to be okay with time. And I've always believed that. And I've definitely said that to people, but I think that until it happens to you, you can really underestimate just how much time it can take. I went for a job once that I was so desperate to get, and I didn't get it. And I kept telling myself, for months on end, it's going to be okay. You're going to get over it. It's going to be time. But I was putting all this pressure on myself to get over it within a certain amount of time. I really wanted to wrap it all up neatly with a bow and pack it away and be like, it's actually for the best that I didn't get that job because of XYZ. But the truth is that it actually took years. And now I can look back and be like, actually, it's a good thing that I didn't get that. Things have really worked out. This was definitely all for the best. I'm very, I'm thankful that it's worked out this way. But it really takes time, and you can't rush that acceptance of failure. You've just got to sit with it for a while.
Yeah, that's why it takes moments to process, but then years later you can look back at in reflective time that you are not really experiencing it anymore, but it took you in a different direction and a different path was chosen for you. But that doesn't happen overnight, especially when you're young and you're like, I didn't get the interview for the thing that I wanted so bad. And that was like my purpose. And that was where my mind was and all I wanted. But then it is like important to kind of step back and understand years later that you're like, oh, I got great opportunities later and I'm worth it and I'm better and I know better.
Yeah.
But
it's patience, I think.
Yes. Well, that's the thing that I had to learn. It took me a long time, but kids will give that for most people, but ultimately patience is a long game. And it's like, I'm in the turtle in the rat race, apparently. But I'm excited for your new book coming out, Friendship First for New Sparks and Chosen Family, How Our Friends Pave the Way a Lifelong Happiness. And I'm excited for everyone to pick it up and check it out to remind you self that friendships are important, how to harbor them, how to connect with them, and how to make ones for your own longevity and how to focus on it. Thank you very much, Yaya, for being here today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Tranquility Magazine Podcast. Please subscribe and add your review and thoughts for our next interview type.